which is why the country is closely connected with the temple. A long time ago, there was a period of turmoil on the continent. There were no leaders, no countries, so humans and monsters lived together. Barely surviving humanity had no rules or morals, and in the midst of this Hausa, a new axis of power was born. The Netri believed that people could change for the better, so they protected them from monsters, and Blaine ruthlessly punished anyone who broke the rules. Two forces, whose principles were opposite, constantly clashed with each other. That is why Vermouth appeared, who became an intermediary between them. The conflict only worsened, so the god endowed the Netri family with the power to protect others. Blaine received the power of submission and punishment, and Vermouth left predictions on 5 tablets. Together with the two families, he founded an empire, and the power given by God is now called the family sword. She found it strange that Blaine didn't even have the ability to defend herself, unlike Netri. Sally saw the sad look on the girl's face and worried that she had done something wrong. However, the heroine immediately smiled and asked if there was anything else she could give her to read. The girl wanted to try all the ways to save the Duke, rather than regret that she had not tried anything. After that, the girls went to a tea party where Angela officially congratulated our heroine on the registration of marriage. There was a festive atmosphere at the table as the butler brought flowers for Schuer. The servant announced that it was a bouquet from His Grace, Duke Reynold. The girl was glad that her husband kept his promise and sent her flowers. The girls at the table noticed that the ribbon on the bouquet was more expensive than the flowers themselves. They explained that this is an expensive fabric that is used for sewing clothes. Schuer was surprised, because in the north he gave only flowers, and here he even tied them with a ribbon. In the late afternoon, the girl went back to the palace to attend another ball with her husband. She wondered why the man was holding another bouquet in his hands. However, the Duke noted that he had not given her a bouquet today, although he had promised to do so. Then Schuer told her that this afternoon at tea they brought her a bouquet from the Duke. The girl wondered who in this case sent her these flowers without a note. She even suggested at one point that it could have been Riley or John. At that moment, the doors opened and His Serene Highness the Duke of Blaine and his wife, the Duchess of Blaine, were introduced to all those gathered. At that time, Riley was sitting on the bare ground and did not understand why our heroine did not leave his mind. Next to him stood the butler and maid who were looking at the huge statue of the Duke. They decided where it would be better to put the statue until the return of the owners. Riley did not approve of such an obvious admiration for the human body at all. Although he said that he would look after the north, there was no need for this. The entire garden was covered in the Duchess's magic, and it was truly amazing. Unlike dark magic, sacred powers and magic do not require sacrifices. However, Blaine's swords are different. Even though they use the same magic and swordsmanship skills, the result is completely different from Netri's. Schuer had mentioned that her younger sister had blossomed, but for some reason her own magic was very similar to the energy of a sword. Riley decided to watch the Duke because he got his power at the wrong time. But suddenly something frightened the wizard so much that he dropped the flower from his hands. He turned around and saw a rooster next to him, which had a black flower in its beak. The boy was annoyed that he could be frightened by some pathetic animal. Meanwhile, in the central part, John was congratulating his masters on their official wedding. The man explained that he had visited his brother on the parade ground, so he was absent from the last ball. He was glad that the girl received a bouquet of flowers, and her work was not in vain. At that very moment, the girl was called out by her friends Brittany and Angela. It seemed as if they were up to some prank and were ready to act. The heroine asked the Duke to chat with someone else and leave her alone for a while. He was interested in his wife's behavior, but decided not to interfere. The man noted that he had something to do in the near future. In fact, it was all a distraction for Angela to roll out the cake. So Schuer grabbed her husband's hand and pulled him to the center of the hall. The girl came closer to the cake and officially congratulated the Duke on his marriage. It was a cute cake with a heart, a lit candle, and their names on it. Schuer and Duke Reynold bent over the cake together and blew out the candle. Immediately after that, the girl snatched a flower from her bouquet and decided to show off her gift. She smiled and briskly threw a delicate pink flower high into the air. Immediately afterward, the entire hall was filled with 1,000 falling petals. Rumors spread that the Netris lied when they said that only the younger sister inherited the power of blooming. Reynold looked carefully at what was happening and suggested that the cake be cut into pieces. The girl agreed with this, but asked not to break her heart in the center. Since this is a symbol of her love, it was necessary to cut off the part where the heart ends. The Duke was surprised by such a request and said that even cutting the cake was quite a task. At that moment, the prince came up to them and began to clap loudly, congratulating them on the wedding. He was very happy to be able to personally congratulate his friend on this event. However, something in his appearance especially attracted the attention of our heroine. The girl noticed that the ribbon of His Majesty the Crown Prince seemed familiar to her. She remembered that her bouquet had recently been tied with exactly the same ribbon. That is why our heroine assumed that this is the official tape of the central region. The prince leaned over to Shuer and asked for her hand in marriage to greet her officially. However, Shuer tucked her hands behind her back and pretended she didn't have them. The prince did not expect such a reaction at all, so he did not know how to react to it. Silence reigned throughout the ballroom. Everyone was waiting for Simon's reaction. After that, the girl said that her own husband should greet her first. Reynald took the girl's hand, brought it gently to his lips, and kissed her gently. All this time, the prince stood next to his outstretched hand and waited for his turn. At that moment, the father of our heroine approached the company and said that it was very rude of her not to respond to the prince's greeting. He approached the girl from behind and put his hand on her shoulder. Instead of greeting her, he immediately began to scold her for not following etiquette. However, Shuer was far from timid, so she boldly threw her father's hand off her shoulder. She cheerfully remarked that the descendants of the Netri family had no manners at all. She jokingly apologized to her father for this behavior and promised him to send a bouquet as an apology. After that, she asked the maid to take this bouquet to the room and instead bring the one that was already there. Father laughed and said that the spouses had a fairly good relationship since they congratulated each other so much. The girl looked at her younger sister and didn't understand why Irina still hadn't said a word. At this time, the Duke communicated with the prince on work topics and discussed the affairs of the north. The prince recalled that the duchy is still part of the Vermouth Empire. The Duke recalled that the treaty was concluded by the previous generation, so they, as descendants, will inherit and continue it. After that, the prince promised his support and offered to ask for help if it was needed. This sounded like a manifestation of care, but in fact it was only an expression of imperial duty. Shuer no longer wanted to talk about political topics, so she grabbed her husband's hand and confessed her love to him. She asked her husband to eat the part of the cake on which her name was written. The Duke immediately carefully grabbed the glove with his teeth and pulled it off his hand. After that, he carefully removed the girl's name from the cake with his finger. And then he licked the cream off his fingertips and asked if she was satisfied. This picture almost stopped the girl's heart. She demanded gloves as a gift. The Duke had already come to terms with her antics, so he silently agreed to give them to her. The assembled people talked among themselves and discussed the behavior of the Duke and Duchess. Suddenly, our heroine unceremoniously jumped into their conversation and offered to try some cake. She walked around the hall and offered to treat everyone present in turn. At the same time, the girl started a casual conversation with each of the guests and smiled brightly. Reynald watched from afar as his wife conversed nicely with the invited guests. Shuer noticed that he was watching her, so she waved her hand. She apologized to her interlocutors and asked for permission to leave for a short time to her husband. After this ball, people began to whisper that the girl was very different from her image from rumors. The heroine ran up to her husband and asked why he was looking at her so intently. Just at that moment, the maid returned and brought the bouquet that had been sent to the girl during the tea party. Even the Duke noticed that the ribbon on him looked like the ribbon of His Highness the Prince. Shuer has noticed that she loves flowers, but only flowers, so she is going to return the bouquet to the sender. After that, she went to Prince Simon and Irina, who were talking to each other. Shuer took her bouquet in her hands and handed it to the crown prince. She said that she was giving this bouquet as an apology, as she had promised earlier. With surprise on her face, our heroine noticed that this bouquet suits the prince more than herself. The girl hoped that Irina would undoubtedly recognize the ribbon with which this bouquet was tied. Angela had even mentioned earlier that such ribbons were used at the imperial court as a sign of secret relationships. The younger sister immediately realized the similarity and noticed that the girl quickly found a similar ribbon. However, the old sister said that she was only returning the bouquet that the prince had given her recently. Simon immediately began to make excuses that the tape had no subtext, and he sent the flowers as congratulations. At that moment, the Duke came up and said that the girl had accepted the flowers because she thought they were from him. The prince admitted his mistake, but still hoped that the girl would be able to accept his gift. However, she insisted on her own and noted that she did not accept flowers if they were not from her husband. Therefore, she was glad that she had found the rightful owner and was returning them to him. The prince also began to make excuses and said that he was not stupid enough to betray his friend and get carried away by his wife. He promised that he would take care of this matter and find out who tied his ribbon on this bouquet. Shuer couldn't fully trust the prince, but she couldn't openly oppose him either, because she hoped that he would become a link between the north and the center. The rest of the evening went well. All the guests rested and talked to each other. Before going to bed, when the maid was combing the girl's hair, she told her about the incident with the bouquet and the prince. This was very strange, because the palace actually hides the sender of flowers only if they don't want to give themselves away intentionally. If the prince was telling the truth, then there were too many suspects in this case. But this only showed how strong they were, because no one attacks the weak from behind. At this time, Reynold returned and asked the maid to leave and leave them alone with his wife. The girl promised that she would definitely put her husband to bed today, and the Duke immediately thought that she had poured something into his drink or mixed it into the cake. The girl noted that she would never do this to someone she loves. Instead, she patiently watched her husband and waited for him to finally undress. The Duke ordered the girl to turn away and not to look at him changing. He even pulled his shirt over her head just so that the girl would not look at him. Our heroine immediately wrapped her arms around her and began to smell the beautiful smell of her husband. The Duke tried to take back his shirt because he didn't want him to lose it. He tried to take her away from the girl, but she did not want to let go of her clothes. The Duke promised to give her something in return when he returned to the north because he needed her in the capital. Shuer promised that she would give it back in the morning, but for now, she wrapped herself in it completely. The girl was worried that her conversation with the prince would spoil the banquet. However, the Duke noted that the situation was better than it had ever been. Shuer noticed that her husband's uniform suited her very well, but he still did not allow her to leave her. After that, the girl asked what plans Reynold would have for tomorrow. She began to rummage through the pockets of her shirt, hoping to find some handkerchief or something. The heroine admitted that she likes the center, but she really lacks the attention of her husband. She expressed her wishes for the man to spend more time with her. The Duke said that he and the prince had an agreement that they would not interfere in each other's internal affairs. If he breaks this promise, the prince will have power over all expeditions, and Riley will be replaced by his wizard. Shuer remembered that in the original, the protagonist, the prince, was not at all interested in the North. If she hadn't interfered with the Duke's emotions, he would have asked the center for help, just like in the novel. The girl thought that she did not want her husband to bow his head to anyone. She continued to listen to her husband, but at this time she gradually fell asleep. She was still trying to stay awake longer and spend time with her husband. However, the Duke immediately realized how tired the girl really was. Shuer found the Duke's hand, brought it to her face, and immediately fell asleep afterward. Some time later, when the girl was already asleep, Reynold was still watching her. He never took his hand away from the girl and just continued to sit next to her. He silently examined his fiancée and tried to study her as best he could. The three founding families of Vermouth, Blaine, and Netry lived in harmony until the imperial family came to control the other two. The engagement with Irina, support in the conquest of the North, became the support of all this. However, Simon was the only one who opposed the actions of the imperial family. But everything suddenly changed after the engagement with one of the Netry sisters. The Duke could not get the incident with the ribbon on the bouquet out of his mind. He was pulled out of his thoughts by a slight stirring next to him and the girl's sniffling. She was smiling in her sleep, and it seemed that she was dreaming something very good. The man calmly continued to watch his young wife and think. The next morning, John went into their room and found the Duke getting his papers. The man ordered his assistant to find the best and most beautiful carving ring. John was disappointed that he had been pulled out so early in the morning for such a trifle. Reynold went on to describe the ring he wanted to find for his wife. John had no choice but to obey and go in search of the necessary thing. After a while, our heroine woke up and immediately saw the Duke in front of her. She considered this a good sign and was glad that now her day would be successful. As promised, the girl took off the Duke's shirt and gave it back to him. After that, she changed her clothes and was about to leave her room when she noticed flowers. It was the Duke who brought his wife the promised bouquet of flowers for each training. He explained that he could use the local training field at will, as in the north. The Duke noticed that Jim, the chief captain of the Knights, Irina's confidant, and John's brother, was now in charge of it. The man immediately began to worry about why the Duchess was asking so many details about his brother. They continued to swear while gradually moving towards the training field. The guys were walking along the corridor of the castle when they heard other people whispering to each other. The girl asked her husband what was happening, but he did not know.
Like this video. Hit the like button and subscribe for more videos.